Good afternoon. I hope I am audible. Hello. Okay. I'm starting the screen share. Please let me know if it is visible or not. So for today's session, we are essentially talking about the sewing part of the course, the second block. हम इस course में we are specifically talking about the single needle lock stitch machines. There are of course different types of machines that are there. There are overlock machines, there are double needle lock stitch machines, but हम इस course के लिए we will be specifically talking about single needle lock stitch machines. These are the machines which are mostly used in most of the household boutiques or any garment factories that is possible. There are handle machines, there are machines जो कि आप टेलरिंग शॉप्स में देखते हो, or there are motorized machines. Most of these machines, however, works with the same principle of two threads. One thread being is used in the needle, and another thread is used from the bottom with the bobbin. Now, these two threads create a lock-like structure, and hence these are called a single needle lock stitch machine. Now, these machines can be of three types. Firstly, it can be a hand operated machine. This is the oldest form of machines and generally very slow. These are operated by hand. एक wheel होता है and जिसको हम balance wheel बोलते हैं. You rotate that wheels and the machine runs. The second one is a treadle machine, which is generally used in the tailoring shops where there is a pedal at the bottom. You treadle the foot pedal and then the machine runs. It is faster than a hand operated machines, but electric या motorized machines is slower है. The balance wheel is attached with a belt with the treadle, and as the treadle moves, the balance wheel also moves. And finally, there is an electric or a motorized machine, which is the fastest machine that is there. It can be domestic machine or it can be industrial. The industrial machines are generally much more faster, works with a much higher RPM. The balance wheel in this case is attached with a motor. There's a belt, the motor runs, and hence the uh, balance wheel runs as well. Coming to the parts of a machine, a machine is generally divided into four parts. If you can follow my pointer, the right side of it is the upright section. ये वाला section को हम upright section बोलते हैं. The straight one is the arm section. This is the face, and then we have the bed of the machine. In the upright section, firstly we have the balance wheel. So this is the balance wheel. This is what runs the machine. It can be a hand wheel also, जहाँ पे there is you rotate the hand wheel and the machine runs, or it can be run through a foot pedal like this. ये domestic machines generally हमारे ऐसे होते हैं, electric domestic machines. So you press on this foot pedal and the balance wheel starts rotating. There is a This is a reverse stitch lever wherein if you press this reverse stitch lever, the machine starts running. And then there are stitch regulators which decides the length of the width of the stitch. In the arm section, we have oil guides. Now, oil guides can be visible or invisible depending on what sort of machine we are using. In a lot of industrial machines, the oil guide are visible from outside and you can see it. Oil gauges होते हैं, oil guides होते हैं. कुछ domestic machines में, most domestic machines में, these are not visible. आपको bed उठा के you'll have to check that. Apart from that, we have the spool pin. This is the spool pin, the bobbin winder. Uh, there are these thread guides जो छोटे छोटे guides होते हैं. This ensures that the spool thread goes through the right direction and the right process. Finally, coming to the face section, यहाँ पे first we have this needle take up lever. This is the needle take up lever. There would be tension screws which ensures that the needle bar is attached properly and the pressure is correct. There are these pressure regulators also which are there. There could be a presser foot, which is this is the presser foot which presses the garment, the fabric on the machine, ensures that it's stitched this properly. At the back there is a pressure foot lifter. Now, in a domestic machine, you lift this pressure foot by hand. In a industrial machine, there is a knee lifter as well, which is below the table of the below the stand of the uh, machine. In the bed, firstly we have the feed dog, which ensures that the fabric moves properly. The fabric which is there on the machine is being moving properly. And we have a throat plate. This is the throat plate on which the pressure foot rests the fabric, and the bed on which the fabric moves. Now, this feed dog is very important, where it is generally has a tooth surface. It gets into the fabric and it ensures the fabric is moving forward. Inside the bed, we also have the bobbin compartment with the bobbin and the bobbin case which goes inside it. The entire thing is generally on a table and a stand. Now, a domestic and an industrial machine varies in some ways. Firstly, there could be certain common features like your balance wheels, stitch length regulators, and thread guides. All these are generally common features. However, the difference happens when in we are talking about the back tack lever. There is, as I said, the presser foot can be lifted through the knee. In the industrial machine, we can see the oil guide. We can see how much oil is there, how is it moving. The eyelets are also different. Coming to the next part of the section, which is the needle. When we are talking about a machine, we are essentially talking about needles. Now, there are certain functions of a needle. Firstly, the first function is to ensure that it penetrates the material without damaging the material. It creates a hole, ensuring that the thread is passing through it. At the same time, we are ensuring that the minimum abrasion or minimum friction is causing. This ensures that the needle is taking the thread down and moving it forward in helping in the stitch formation. When you look at the structure of a needle, this is a machine needle. Uh, the needle has certain sections. We start with the back of the needle. It's called the butt of the needle, which is a part which is almost like a small truncated pyramid-like structure. Uh, it fits into the needle bar. Next, there is this cylindrical part which goes into the needle bar with a needle screw. This is called the shank, followed by the shoulder, which connects the shank with the blade. This is the blade section. Blade section is what cuts into the fabric. This is a longer section with a groove in it. This groove is called the long groove. On the opposite side of the long groove, there is a small part which is called the short groove. Uh, at the back of the needle, we see a hollowed out cut. This hollowed out cut is called the scarf, followed by an eye. This is where you thread your needle. This is the small hole through which you put in your thread, followed by the point, how the point is curved, and finally the tip. The tip is the extreme end of the needle. Now, the sizes of the needle is defined by the diameter of the blade above, just above the scarf or the groove. So just in this part, we take the diameter, and this defines the size of the needle. This is measured by hundredth of millimeter. So, and it is expressed as metric mm. So, if the diameter is, let's say, 0.9 mm, it is multiplied by 100. So it is 90 mm is the needle size. Now needles can be of different types. Firstly, we have cloth point prints. Among the cloth point prints, we have round and ball points, and in the other hand, we have something which we call as cutting point uh, needles. Now, looking at there are these images. Please follow this. So the first one is an universal needle which we use most commonly. It is a cloth point needle, and if you see, the point is comparatively has a point to it, uh, slightly rounded, and it works in most of our woven fabrics. The ballpoint needle, on the other hand, is much rounded in the front, and it is used mostly for our knitted fabrics. It ensures that it can be slipped down between the yarns, ensure that it doesn't cut the yarn, because it is very important that if we do not use ballpoint uh, needles in knitted fabrics, the yarn will cut, and it will lose the loop formations that is there. And we have stretch needles which are often used in again knits, stretch knits, um, in fabrics which use a lot of lycra, undergarments, lingerie, essentially use this stretch needles. If you can see, there is a hollowed out part, like a hump part here, which ensures a smooth stitching. Next to that, these are the cutting point needles. The bottom four are essentially micro point needles. These are sharp points, essentially ensures that it cuts through the fabric. These are essentially used for heavyweight woven fabrics, denim or canvas. So you can see how sharp the point is. At the same time, it is a little wider uh, than the ones that follow. These are used because it is used for heavyweight fabrics. It has to be a little thicker. So the needle size is also a little bigger. Followed by a quilting needle, which is a very narrow, thin needle, at the same time very sharp point. It is very useful when you sew multiple layers of fabric, as in when we do for uh, quilts. Then we have the leather uh, cutting. So here you see that the cutting point is very very sharp. The needle is very thin. Uh, Please understand that a needle used for when we stitch leather, the hole that it makes, it is almost like a permanent point. Because it's a permanent point, it has to be a very small hole that should be created. Hence, we need a very fine needle, very thin needle. And finally, a microtex or a sharp point needle used for very fine yarns and very fabrics like suede or coats. I'm continuing this course. If they join, they join. So coming to the selection of the needle that is there, uh, the fabric, the size of the needle has to depend, and the for that matter the thread or the stitch have to depend on the size of the fabric that we are essentially choosing. Which essentially means that if we are working with something which is uh, of a very fine. Hello. So the finer the yarn, the finer the needle, both the needle and the thread has to be. So this will essentially prevent the damage that is there to the material. The coarser the material, however, the thicker needle has to be used. This is important because otherwise the needle will break. The needle type also relates to the fabric structure, whether it is a round point for woven or a ball point for knits, or for that matter, a cutting point for something like leather. Thread type is chosen for its compatibility with the fabric structure and fiber content. For example, cotton threads is for cotton fabrics. Stitch length depends on the fabric weight. The lighter the weight of the fabric, the shorter the stitch length. Now, stitch length is generally we define stitch length by stitches per inch. So if you can see on the top we have shearer fabrics like organza, organdy, net, pile, chiffon. So in those cases we are using a smaller needle size and the stitch per inches. So number of stitches in 1 inch is much more. So we have 16 to 20 inches for lighter fabrics as we are moving upward for lightweight things like cotton, taffeta crepe. We have a an intermediate size of needle, and then the SPI is also reducing. For a medium weight fabrics like linen, corduroy, muslin, we have even higher needle size and even less SPI. For heavy fabrics like denim, tweeds, and furnishing, we have again needle size which is much more and the shortest SPIs. Now, how is a stitch formed? A stitch is formed by 5 basic operations that goes in. At the first, the needle goes through the fabric, brings the upper thread down to the bottom area like this. As the needle is going back up, as you can see, the needle is going back up. It is creating a thread like loop across the hook, and this will work as a catch. Now the shuttle hook is carrying the needle thread here. It is carrying the needle thread all around the bottom of the bobbin case. The shuttle hook goes around in the fourth section and the needle thread slips off the end. Right here it is slipping off the end and goes around the bobbin thread. And at the end, both the threads are pulled up as the needle is rising. So both of these are pulling up as the needle is rising and the fabric is moving forward and a lock stitch is formed. Now, when we are talking about stitches, something which is very important is the tension of the stitch. Now, there can be essentially two cases. Either we have a balanced tension or we have a unbalanced tension. A balanced tension essentially means that ideal stitches are formed and needle thread and the bobbin thread are perfectly interlocked right at the center of the fabric. When the pressure is correct on both threads, the balance amount of each thread used for each stitch and the connected link of each stitch is centered between the fabric layers. So hence a balanced tension works. However, in the case when the upper tension is too tight and the thread from the needle lies flat on the surface of the fabric and the bobbin thread is looping over it, the top tension is too tight. There would be links that would appear on the top of the fabric, will be seen on the top side of the work. This essentially means that either there is too much tension on the top thread or too little on the bobbin thread. So to bring the link down towards the center of the layer of the fabric, you have to decrease the top tension. When let's say the upper tension is too loose, the links towards the bottom fabric layer would form and loops will be seen on the bottom side of the work. So this will show that either the top tension is too loose or there is too much tension on the bobbin thread. To bring this link up and toward the center of the fabric, we have to increase the top tension. Now, there can be some common sewing problems. Firstly, there can be needle breaking. Now, needle breaking is the most common type of problem that is there that one can come across. Now, what can cause this? It can cause due to a number of reasons. Firstly, that the machine is possibly incorrectly threaded. It's not threaded correctly. So correct threading sequence has to be followed, like we discussed in the first part. The upper tension might be very tight, so this is exerting a lot of pressure on the thread from the needle. Now the needle also has to be seen whether it is installed correctly or not. If it is not installed correctly, if it is not in the correct section, then you have to check and correct it. The needle itself may be a little bent or blunt or a little damaged from the very beginning. So check the needle in that case. And for that matter, a poor thread uh, quality might break very easily. So you have to see whether the thread is of correct quality or not. Followed by the second point, which is the bobbin thread keeps on breaking. Now, one of the reasons why a bobbin thread breaks is maybe the lower tension is too tight. So in that case, we have to reduce the tension in the bottom case. Now, you have to understand something that the needle thread and the bobbin thread are exactly reverse of each other. So, uh, whatever are the reasons for a needle thread breaking, the breakage of bobbin thread is most commonly the opposites of that. The bobbin itself, the bobbin case itself, might also have very sharp edges, and this might also create friction with the thread. Thirdly, we can also have sketches. The reasons of the skip stitches is again, and one of the reasons is that the machine is not correctly threaded. So then we'll have to check whether the threading sequence is proper or not. Uh, the needle may be installed correctly, but you know, check whether it fits into the. I request people to please put yourself on silent. If somebody is not on silent, please put yourself on silent. Uh, we can also check whether the pressure foot is proper or not. So there can be a lack of pressure. So in that case, we have to increase the pressure on the pressure foot. We also have to see whether the needle size is correct or not. So in a couple of slides ago, we saw the needle sizes for the actual fabrics. So you have to see whether if it is needle is too fine for the fabric being used, or higher needle number we have to use for because let's say it's a thicker fabric. So you have to use a higher needle number. Uh, what if we see loops on the top side of the work? Essentially, अभी हमने जो बात करी, it essentially means it's the unbalanced tension. It can mean that the on the top side, it means that the bobbin thread is loose or the needle thread is tight. And exactly on the reverse case, if we see loops on the underside of the word, it essentially means that the upper tension is or the needle tension is too loose and the bobbin tension is too tight. We can also see crowded stitches. So a lot of stitches being, formed very close together. This happens because the pressure on the foot bar might not be correct. To check and correct that, we can also see at times needle keeps on breaking. The needle itself keeps on breaking. So that can happen whether when the needle is very fine for the fabric, we have to use the correct size needle. At times when you use, when we start stitching, we pin the fabric and then we stitch out. There are buttons or zipper which has to be attached. If you stitch on the top of those, that can also lead to needle breaking. Also check the pressure foot properly. If the pressure foot is not properly installed, the needle might break. The material at times doesn't feed properly. What do I mean by that? That the material is not moving forward properly. The most obvious reason of this is that the pressure foot, there is not enough pressure on the pressure foot, and the stitch regulator may be not put in the correct setting. You might also see puckering on both the sides of fabric, so which essentially means that the fabric is gathering up, and so in most cases that the needle is too big for the fabric. So instead of thinner needle, you have taken a too much of a thicker needle. So you have to reduce the needle size. The tension for both the upper and the bobbin case, the needle and the bobbin thread, when the tensions are too high, this can also lead to puckering. Coming to the next part of the section, which is the pressing. Now, what is the purpose of a pressing? Pressing essentially is done with an iron. The purpose is to remove all creases, ensure that the garment is in the right shape. We shrink away the fullness. It gives a very neat and smooth appearance. It also creates proper shapes in garments or fabrics. Without it, it will of course look very unfinished and untidy. Now, there are essentially two types of pressing. Firstly, there is underpressing. Underpressing is done while the garment is being made. So it is done on every section of the garment, every part of the garment. It's in the intermediate stages. For example, while you are making the collars or cuffs or seams, at every stage you are doing an underpressing. It is very important. It makes the garment very flat. It ensures that everything is in right point, and the subsequent step becomes very easier to do. The top pressing, on the other hand, is done once the entire operation is done, on entire garment is being made. So final pressing, as we call it, we also call this off pressing. So this is done just before you pack the garment. Now there is a basic difference between ironing and pressing. Ironing essentially means sliding the heated iron over the material. So you're doing to and froing the iron over the material to smoothing out the surface. That means ironing. Pressing, on the other hand, is simply applying pressure with addition to heat. Now, we have to ensure that when we are making our garments, we do not iron, we press. Why? Because ironing will stretch your fabric. So, if you do not press and you iron an unstitched fabric, it will essentially stretch, it will uh, lose dimensional stability. So Ironing can only be done once your entire garment is ready. The entire stitching part is done. Only then we can do ironing. That too, it is preferable that we do not iron on very high heat. Now, there are basically two types of iron, the dry or the plain electric iron that is there, and there are steam electric irons. Now, steam electric irons has to be used very carefully because there are certain fabrics which doesn't allow you to use steam. We'll talk about them in a moment. Now, for example, we have to see how my fabric behaves with the heat and the pressure. So you would see that when you iron certain fabrics, it shines. It essentially means that if the fabric you're putting in too much pressure and hence it shines. Too much of heat will also ensure that certain fabric melts. For example, fabrics like polyester and nylon melts when you use too much of heat. Fabrics like silk, if you use water on them, it will leave a watermark. So hence, whenever we have a silk sari or a silk dress, it is always advised to use a dry cleaning technique. We do not wash them. So for a fabric like that, usage of steam or damp clothing in clothes and during pressing is extremely harmful. If the fabric shrinks, for example, something like linen, if it shrinks again, we should not be using any moisture or steam. Uh, if it is showing impression, the folded edges are showing an impression, we have to reduce the amount of pressure. And if the fabric is a special fabric which needs some special equipment, for example, when we have file fabrics, fabrics like these, we a needle board is would be required so that the files doesn't flatten out. There are certain directions with which we press fabrics. For example, yesterday when we were talking about patterns, we saw the center back and the center front seams. Now, center back and center front seams should always be pressed with the seams open. The side seam should be either turned towards the back or kept open. The shoulder seams again can be kept open or preferably turned towards the back. A plain or a vertical seam would essentially ensure that the seams are towards the side seam, all seams towards the side seam. The horizontal seams uh, generally should point towards the hem, with an exception of our waist seams, which is always on the top. The volume of which is always on the top. If you have darts, if you have vertical darts, then it should be towards side seam. If you have horizontal darts, just like horizontal seams, it should be pointing downwards. The gathers, we should not be pressing gathers. We should rather press into the gathers with the just the tip of the iron, so that those do not the gathers do not flatten out. Now, in relation to fabrics, uh, the first type of fabrics that are there are cottons and linens. Cottons are generally very easy to press. They generally require a very hot iron. We can use moisture, we can use pressure. Uh, if you're using a steam iron, then the fabric and the fabric has a glazed finish. It is can be finished on the right side. Otherwise, you should always press on the wrong side so that it doesn't scorch. The linens, coming to the linens, the problem with it is then you can use a lot of heat, but it tends to shrink. So, if you're using too much of moisture, it will shrink. So you can, if you want to use steam, you can use a very minimal steam. Silks, these are very fine quality fabrics, and it's a very difficult fabric to press. uh, there is also a tendency of silk that they cling and they do not lie flat properly. So very light pressure and a moderately hot iron should be used. For synthetic fabrics, this requires a cool iron so that it doesn't melt away. Uh, Moisture is preferably not to be used so that we do not have watermarks on it. Lightweight woolens, we can press it with a moderately hot iron with a little of steam and pressure. But we should not be using a lot of pressure, otherwise this will cause impressions. Pile fabrics has to be always ironed on the opposite side, on the wrong side of the fabric and never on the right side. Now, seams, we can use certain techniques to reduce seam bulk. The first one is trimming. So, if you see this image, the one in the left bottom, this is a technique of trimming the seam allowance. So, if you can see, this was the seam allowance initially, they are gradually trimming the seam allowance, ensuring that a narrower seam allowance is left and it is easy to stitch and turn it around. For curved lines, we often slash the seam. So when you slash the seam and you turn it around, so this is how it looks and it lies flat. Also, we can use notching techniques like this to reduce the bulk of the seam. There are certain special seams. Now, it has to be stitched in certain, with certain techniques. For example, the first one is a bias seam. So there are bias bounds done on both the sides. So whenever stitching bias seams, the fabric has to be kept very tight without stretching so that the seam doesn't pucker up. For a curved seam, you can see this is a curved seam. Uh, we have to ensure that, because understand that one is a curve this side, another is a curve on the opposite side, to ensure that this lengths do not vary. When you're stitching, this lengths do not vary. It is important that both the fabrics are, kept, and a very slow running machine is used. You control the motor speed of the machine, or if you're using hand, you're ensuring that the speed of the machine can be very controlled. Whenever stitching a gather seam, it is required that the gathering part is on the top side. It is never on the bottom side, otherwise it will just flatten out the gathers. So it should always be on the top side. And finally, a corner seam. Whenever we are using a stitching a corner seam, a very small, stitch length has to be used. So which essentially means a very high SPI, stitch per inches. Very high SPI has to be used so that we get a very crisp corner. Coming to darts, there are two basic kinds of darts that are there. In yesterday class, when we were talking about borders, we saw single pointed darts. So these are essentially single pointed darts, wherein the dart has one single point and it opens up in another side. Looks almost like a triangle. Whenever we are stitching this, we have to ensure that the bulk of the dart goes to the side seam, and we have to ensure that we do not backtack at the point because it will create a puckering in the dart point. On the other hand, when we have darts like this, these are called fish dart. If you see, it looks like a small, burpy sort of structure, and these are also called double pointed or fish darts. When you are, these are long darts with two ends. Uh, Generally, that fits around the waistline. Uh, when we are uh, using stitching darts like this, we often have to clip. After stitching, we have to clip and trim the maximum bulk of the waist, dart which is around the waist. Otherwise, it doesn't fit properly. Once we are decided with all the design details, we can just select the fabrics. Now fabrics are of different types. There are lightweight fabrics, medium weight and heavy weight. So on a very basic way, we categorize fabrics into these three types. Give me a moment. Yes. So these are the three basic categories in which we generally uh, divide up our fabrics. So in a lightweight category, we have our chiffon or voile or cheesecloths. In medium weight, we have poplin, cambric, or calico fabrics. The heavyweight will have denim, corduroy, casein fabrics. Once we have selected the fabric, it is very important that we prepare the fabric. For preparing, firstly we straighten the fabric. The fabric has to be, we often see the warp and the weft yarns of the fabric is not perpendicular and right angled to each other. So in those cases, we have to ensure that uh, is are perpendicular. So we often use a technique of tearing or pulling a thread or blocking for that matter. So ensuring that the fabric is straightened out. And also there are certain fabrics which are prone to shrinking. So we have to ensure that we shrink them before we start the stitching or cutting, because if you do not do that, once the garment is made, it will shrink and it will become smaller. So we wash the fabric beforehand, get it get itself time to shrink, and then we start stitching the garment. Now the when we make the layouts, uh, when we lay out the fabric, there can be multiple ways of doing that. The first one is an open layout. Now an open layout, the fabric is laid without any folds, it is laid flat. It is essential for any fabrics which is very sheer or slippery. um, it is necessary that we make full patterns whenever we are working with open layouts, and it is the most commonly used method in open layout method is the most commonly used method in industries, and these are then cut with straight knife cutting machines. Next we have the folded layouts, wherein the fabric is folded in half, either in length or widthwise. In the lengthwise fold, it is very important that we align the selvages to each other so that they meet each other. uh, In these cases, we are generally folding right side facing right side, and all the markings are done on the wrong side. We can also have a lengthwise folded layout, which is essentially it is folded twice the lengthwise so that both the selvages are together, and we can make the garments in just half, cut the garments in half and in folds, and so that a full thing comes out. Once this layout is spread, we make markers. Now, markers can be manual markers or digital markers. So, on the top right, what you see the image, these are manual markers being created. In the bottom, what you see, it's a digital marker used with a computer-aided design technique, a CAD, apparel CAD technique. Now, the purpose of a marker is to ensure that minimum fabric wastage is done, because of course you'll be creating multiple pieces, you're cutting multiple pieces, you have to ensure that minimal wastage of fabric happens. Now there are multiple factors affects the choice of the seam type. Firstly, it can be the type and the weight of the fabric. So different type of seams are different used for different kinds of fabric. For example, lightweight fabrics, heavyweight or sheer weight. So now choice of fabric will depend on many factors, whether the fabric is raveling excessively or at all or not at all. Now, usually for fabrics which is sheer and we need a neat finish, we use a French seam. We have to ensure that whenever we are using seams, the seams has to be very narrow and almost invisible. Uh, we also use seams which are like self-enclosed, uh, or if let's say if we uh, have a fabric which can add up to a lot of bulk, then we would rather use a plain seam. The type of garment will also decide what sort of seam to be used. Uh, for example, certain garments requires a top stitches. For example, garments like shirts often needs a top stitch. Uh, Garments which are, for example, kids wear would often need a stronger seam than that of a regular other garment. Uh, Finally, position of the seam. So whether the seam is visible or not visible decides what sort of seam we can use. For example, if it is a fully lined garment, we would rather use a seam which is very properly finished. However, if it is an unlined garment, then we might be using bias bounds or fan seams, ensuring that the seam doesn't show. Now, these are the various seams that are used for different fabrics. So, starting with the plain seam, this is the most common seam that is there. Now, this can be just a plain seam with stitch, or maybe the edges are cut with pinked edges. Now, these are used for fine to medium weight fabrics that do not fray a lot. So, fabrics like let's say denim or muslin is generally okay when you use a plain seam. This generally works okay with you know uh, very neat looks, and for example again leather for that matter doesn't fray at all, so you can use that. Then we have turned and stitched edges, wherein the plain seam itself is turned and stitched on the edge. So again for fine to medium cotton or linen. Now this is again neat, very useful for fabrics which garments which you wash over and over again. Then we have bias bound edges. So we saw the bias seam just few slides back. So wherein the a plain seam is stitched and the edges are bound by bias. So these are generally used for fabrics that has a tendency to fray. So that it doesn't fray, we generally use a extra bias bound. So this also creates a very neat finish. So, for example, in necklines or in armholes, wherever there are curved places, which is difficult to, stitch with French seams or any other flat-on felt seam. These are useful in those cases. This is an expensive sort of finish, so we would rather use it in garments which are a little high price. So again, in underlying jackets, we use this. Then we have overlocked edges, wherein we have a plain seam and then the edges are overlocked. This is done. This can be done with almost all fabrics. And however, it's a very cheap finish and it doesn't give you a very finished and fine look. Next, we have French seams. French seams is a it's a very fine seam. So it's used for sheer and very fine chiffon fabrics. It gives you, and it's also a very strong seam. It doesn't tear off very easily. So blouses or children's wear, kids wear, we often use French seam. Then we have flattened felt seam. Flattened felt seam is often used in denim, or we often see this in the inseam of the jeans pants or the side seam of shirts. This used in cotton, silk, or denim for that matter. It also is a very strong seam and very useful for garments which needs frequent washing. Welt seam is used on heavier fabrics, medium to heavier fabrics. It is it's although it's an expensive seam, it gives you a very tailored look. It's hence used in skirts or dresses. coats or jackets. So this brings me to the end of today's session. If there is any query, then I would be have to answer. I am not being able to share the PPT. This all the materials are from the material that is there shared to you from IGNOU. Also, the class is being recorded. You can ask for the recording from RC and they can share you the recording. I will not be able to share the PPT.
Ma'am,
Yes,
ma'am, yesterday you have given the exercise one for the homework, right?
correct.
Yes, then in which book that page is available? I can't get it.
Uh, you can go to the practical part. Wait, I'll show you. I hope this you have this with you. This is the practical workbook. Yes.
No, ma'am, I don't have that practical notebook.
Please go to the IGNOU, the part where you get download all the materials from. Please go to that section. You can find it
Yes,
in the course material itself. On that,
yes, ma'am.
the first exercise is this one.
Okay,
So you have block 1, block 2, and a practical workbook. So you have to find the
yes,
practical workbook.
okay, ma'am.
For this section, I'm not giving you any part of assignment. Once we do the practical part in the next class, which is on Friday, we will I'll give you the assignment which is related to this part. I think we have few new people who had joined today. Uh, there is one assignment that I have asked to do as a part of the class that we had yesterday, which is the assignment exercise 1 from the practical workbook. The evaluation of the same would be seen on the class of 27th. I'll brief about it again on the Friday's session. Uh, Please ensure that you have seen that.
Ma'am,
Yes.
ma'am, on the day of the practical on the Friday, we need any instruments that you have told yesterday.
Not really. You will see the practical, you will see the demonstration, and then you will have to do it. आपको आप जब
Okay.
मतलब क्लास के टाइम पे तो आप नहीं कर पाओगे क्योंकि देखते देखते आप नहीं कर
हाँ,
पाओगे. So you
हाँ.
will see the demonstration in the class and then you will do it yourself and submit it.
Okay.
Take, yeah, take photographs of those and submit it. Okay, thank you then.